The first thing Wren heard was the dog going quiet. Not the kind of quiet that meant sleep. Buckshot had been lying near the stove when she came in from the woodpile, and he'd lifted his head once, ears flat, and then he simply stopped breathing loud. Dogs didn't go quiet like that unless something outside had already decided to come in. She stood with the stack of split pine still in her arms and listened. Wind, the creak of the roof beam that always complained in October. Then, underneath all of it, the unmistakable sound of boots on frozen ground, more than one pair. Wren set the wood down without sound. She had been alone on this mountain for 11 months, not by accident. She had chosen it. Or rather, the choosing had been made for her the night she'd walked out of her brother-in-law's house in Cutter's Fork, with nothing but a flour sack and the clothes she was wearing, and the absolute certainty that if she stayed another winter, she would not survive it. Not the cold. Him. The mountain had been her late husband's family land, unclaimed after his passing, and she had come here because no one else wanted it, and no one would think to look. That had been a miscalculation. She crossed to the window in 3 steps and pressed herself flat against the log wall, tilting just enough to see through the frost-edged glass. 2 men near the tree line, a third already crossing the open ground toward the porch, moving like he owned the approach, like the dark and the cold were things that happened to other people. Wren knew the one in front. She didn't know his name, but she knew the type, the kind her brother-in-law sent when he wanted to make a point without making it himself. The man had a particular walk, unhurried. That was always the worst kind. Men in a hurry could be reasoned with or outrun. Men who took their time had already done the math. She moved to the far wall before the knock came. It wasn't really a knock. It was the heel of a fist, flat and hard, the way you'd hit a door you expected to open. "We know you're in there." His voice was cheerful in the way that knives were cheerful. "Come on out, Wren. Your brother Doyle just wants to talk." Doyle was not her brother. He had been her husband's brother, and her husband had been dead for 14 months, and the land deed she had found tucked in the lining of an old boot. 3 weeks after the funeral had her name on it, and not Doyle's, which was the reason for all of this. She picked up the axe handle from beside the door. Not the axe. She'd left the blade outside, just the handle, a solid length of hickory that had belonged to her husband's father, worn smooth in the middle from decades of grip. It wasn't a gun, but it was what she had. "Last time I'm asking nice," the voice said. The door came in before she had time to brace for it. Not kicked, shouldered, hard and deliberate, the latch tearing free of the wood like paper. The man in front was bigger than she'd judged from the window. They always were. He took up the doorframe, and then he stepped inside, and the 2 from the tree line were already coming across the yard. Wren swung. She caught him across the forearm, and he swore and grabbed for her, and she got clear of his hand, and swung again, this time at the lamp on the table, because she wanted darkness more than she wanted light. And the lamp went over, and the room dropped to just firelight, and the man was still between her and the door. She hit him a 3rd time across the back of the knee, and he went down on one side, and she was past him, and through the door and off the porch in 2 steps. And then she was in the open, in the cold, in the dark, and both remaining men were between her and the tree line. The one on the left caught her by the arm. She turned into it. Instead of, Nups surprised him long enough for her to drive her elbow up into his jaw. He didn't go down, but he let go. She ran. The ground was frozen and uneven, and she knew it by feel, every root and hollow, and the place near the old fence post, where the ground dipped, and she was counting on that, because they didn't know it. She made the tree line. She did not make it far past it. The 3rd one, the one who'd been hanging back, came out of the dark between 2 spruce trees like he'd been there all along, and he grabbed her by both shoulders and lifted her, and she was suddenly off the ground, which was a feeling so disorienting. She went briefly still, and that stillness was enough. "You done?" he asked. His voice was different from the other ones, No cheer in it at all, just flat, businesslike, the way a man sounds when he's doing work he'd rather not be doing but intends to finish. She drove her heel down toward his knee, and he shifted his weight and she missed, and he held on. She was trying to find another angle when she heard something move in the trees to the north. Not the wind, not an animal. Something with intention. The man holding her heard it too. She felt him go still. What came out of the dark was large enough that her mind didn't register it as a person at first. It was a shape, tall and broad and moving without particular urgency, and it was carrying something long across one forearm. The firelight from the cabin's open door reached just far enough to catch the outline of a face, a beard, heavy brows, eyes that were taking in the entire situation with a quiet that was almost worse than anger. He stopped at the edge of the light. "Let her go," he said. Not loud, not a shout, just a statement, like a man correcting a simple error. The one holding Wren did not let go immediately. She could feel him calculating weight, distance, what the man at the tree line was carrying. The calculation apparently did not come out in his favor, because after a moment his hands loosened. She stepped away from him. The two from the yard had come up behind her now, 3 men and 1 woman and 1 stranger in the dark, and nobody was moving. "This is private business," the one she'd hit first said. He'd come out of the cabin holding his forearm. "Nothing to do with you." "It is now," the big man said. There was a long pause, the kind that meant the men were deciding whether the arithmetic had changed enough to make violence worthwhile. Wren stood between them and watched the stranger's face and found nothing in it to read, not nervousness, not anger, not the specific pleasure some men took in this kind of standoff, just attention. He was watching all 3 of them the way a person watches weather. The man with the forearm said something to the others, low and fast, and then they went, not running. Men like that didn't run. But they went, back through the yard and around the cabin, and after a while she heard horses on the trail that led down the south ridge. She stood in the dark, and her hands were shaking, and she would not show that. The stranger didn't come closer. He just stood where he was, at the edge of the firelight, and waited. "You live up here?" she finally asked. "North Ridge," he said. 3 miles. She'd been on this mountain nearly a year, and she'd never seen him. She'd never seen any sign of him, which meant he was either very careful or had been there long enough to become part of the place. "I didn't ask you to help," she said. "No," he said. "You didn't." He waited while she went back inside and righted the lamp and found the matches and got the wick lit again. He stayed in the doorway. Not inside, not outside, just at the threshold, and when she'd got the light going she turned and looked at him properly for the first time. He was older than she'd thought. Late 30s, maybe 40, with the kind of face that had been in weather long enough to stop looking temporary. His coat was heavy canvas, patched at both elbows, and the rifle he was carrying was a lever-action Winchester that he held with the unconscious familiarity of something he'd been carrying since before he had to think about it. His name, he said, was Callum. He didn't offer a last name, and she didn't ask for one. She had come to this mountain specifically to stop mattering to people, and she supposed he had too. She made coffee because her hands needed something to do. She didn't invite him in exactly, but she didn't tell him to stand in the cold either, and after a moment he came inside and stood near the door with his hat in one hand. Buckshot came over and sniffed his boots and then went back to the stove. "They'll come back," Callum said. "I know that. How many times now?" She looked at him. "This is the 2nd time they've sent people up here. First time it was just 1 man and I made enough noise he decided it wasn't worth it." She paused. "Tonight was different. Tonight was a message," he said. "What do they want?" She told him about the deed, about Doyle, who was not a bad man in the way that cruel men were bad. He didn't enjoy it, which almost made it worse, because he was simply practical about it. The land was worth money. The woman holding the deed was not. The math was simple. Callum listened without interrupting, which was not a common trait. When she was finished, he looked at his coffee cup for a while. "I was in the valley last spring," he said finally. "Saw a man named Doyle Renck talking to a county clerk. Didn't think about it much at the time." He paused. "He's trying to get the deed recorded in his name before you can file it yourself." Wren stared at him. "How do you know that?" "Because that's what I would do if I were him." He said it, without any particular expression. "How long have you had the deed?" 11 months. "Then you have a narrow window." She knew that. She'd been trying to get down to the county seat for 2 months, and something had always stopped her. Early snowfall, a lame horse, the axle on the wagon cracking on the south trail. She'd started to wonder if some of those things had been arranged. "I can't go alone," she said, and she hated saying it because it was true, and she hated things that were true and inconvenient simultaneously. Callum looked at the door, then at her. "I'll take you down," he said. "Why?" He thought about it for longer than she expected, not evasively, like he was being honest with himself before he was honest with her. "I've been up on this mountain a long time," he said. "Long enough to forget some things I shouldn't have forgotten." He set his coffee cup down on the table and picked up his hat. "Doyle Renck has been buying up land on this ridge for 3 years. He gets that deed. He'll have a clear run at every homestead between here and the North Pass. There are people up here who can't fight what's coming." He paused. "So it's not entirely for you." She appreciated that, more than she would have appreciated a different answer. He came back before dawn, with his horse, and a mule he said was steadier on ice than anything, with 4 legs had a right to be. She'd been awake for all of the hours between, not from fear, or not only from fear, but from the particular alertness of someone who has been making all their own decisions for so long that the introduction of another person into any plan feels like a variable she hasn't yet solved for. They left before the sun came over the eastern ridge. The trail down the south face was bad, ice over rock in the shadowed sections, loose shale where the afternoon sun had worked on it. And they didn't talk much for the first 2 hours because the footing required attention. She found herself watching the way Callum moved his horse through the difficult sections. Patient, not forcing. He read the terrain a moment before they were in it, which was a skill that took years to learn and couldn't be faked. By the time they reached the lower trail where the pines thinned and the valley opened below them, the sun was properly up and she could feel the cold starting to ease. "How long have you been on the North Ridge?" she asked. 7 years, he said. She did the arithmetic. That would have been. "Yes," he said, which told her enough. She didn't push it. People came to mountains for reasons, and the reasons were their own. She had hers, he had his. They had arrived at similar conclusions about solitude, from, she suspected, very different directions. They came into Cutter's Fork in the early afternoon. She had not been in the town since March, and the town had done what small towns did, which was stay almost completely the same while becoming slightly more shabby around the edges. The post office still leaned. The hotel still had its sign missing the O from hotel. The county clerk's office was on the south end of the main street, set back from the road, with a window that needed washing. Wren had been imagining this moment for 11 months, the specific feeling of walking through that door with the deed in her coat pocket, the paper worn soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. She almost made it to the door. Doyle was coming out as she was going in. He was shorter than she remembered, or maybe she'd spent 11 months building him up to a size that didn't match the actual man. He stopped when he saw her. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, exactly, but the specific calculation of a man who has been caught mid-process. "Wren," he said, like he was surprised to see her in his brother's hometown. "Doyle," she said. He looked past her at Callum, who had stopped at the edge of the boardwalk with his arms loose at his sides and his hat brim shadowing his face. Doyle looked for a long time. Callum looked back. Doyle looked at Wren again. "Whatever you think you're doing," he said, low and even, There are ways this goes, and ways it doesn't. I know, she said. I'm counting on that. She went inside. The clerk was a small, precise man named, it said on the placard on his desk, Aldous Fenn, and he looked up over his glasses with the expression of someone who processed a great deal of other people's problems without allowing himself to become personally invested in any of them. She set the deed on his desk. He looked at it. He looked at her. He put his glasses on properly and looked at the deed again. This was filed with the territorial office in November of last year, he said. Yes, she said. In your name. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. He picked up the document and held it to the light from the window. Someone came in this morning, he said. Carefully, the way a man speaks when he is choosing his words around something uncomfortable. With a document claiming the same parcel. I know, Wren said. What is the date stamp on mine? He looked. He looked at the other document on his desk. He set the first one down and picked up the second one and looked at that. Yours predates it by 11 months, he said. Yes, she said. It does. He was quiet again for a long time. Outside she could hear Cutter's Fork doing its afternoon business. A wagon, voices, the particular sound of a town that did not know and did not especially care what was happening inside this office. The clerk set both documents on his desk side by side and folded his hands. I'll need to record this formally, he said. There'll be a filing fee. I have it, she said. She was outside again in 20 minutes. The sun had moved. Callum was where she'd left him, at the edge of the boardwalk, and Doyle was gone. She didn't say anything right away. She stood in the thin November sun and felt the specific sensation of something she'd been carrying for 11 months shift in weight. Not disappear. Just change. The way a load feels different once you know you've made it to the top of the hill. Done, Callum asked. Done, she said. He nodded once. He untied his horse from the post. They started back through town toward the North Trail. She walked beside him, and neither of them spoke for a while, which was comfortable in the specific way that silence is comfortable between people who have spent enough time alone to know that words are not always the point. At the edge of town, where the trail began to climb, she stopped. I don't know how to repay you, she said. He looked at the trail ahead of them. I didn't do it for payment. I know that, she said. That's why I'm saying it. He thought about this for a moment, which was becoming something she recognized about him, the way he took things seriously that other men would have waved off. You did the hard part, he said. You stayed up there, 11 months alone, and you stayed. She looked at the mountain rising above them, her mountain, the land whose deed was now recorded, in her name, in the county clerk's filing cabinet behind a man named Aldous Fenn, who was, whatever else he was, thorough. I didn't have anywhere else to go, she said. Yes, you did, Callum said. You just chose not to. They climbed. The trail switch-backed up, through the pine, and the cold came back as they gained elevation. And Buckshot, who had come with them, she hadn't been able to leave him, trotted ahead of them in the loose snow, as if this were simply the way Tuesday went. She thought about what it meant that she had not known Callum was up there. 3 miles on the North Ridge, 7 years, and she had been alone on the same mountain all this time, not knowing there was someone just over the next spine of rock, who had apparently decided, sometime last night, that her problem was also his. When we get back, she said, I'd like to know where your trail is. He glanced at her. So I know where to find you, she said. If something comes up. He considered this. And if nothing comes up? She thought about the winter ahead. The silence she had learned to live inside, the specific loneliness of being competent at surviving something nobody else can see. Neighbor's good too, she said. He didn't smile exactly, but something in his face did something. The sun dropped behind the western peak, and the cold sharpened and the trail climbed, and above them the mountain was quiet in the way that mountains were quiet, which was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something larger than sound, space and time, and the particular weight of high places that reminded that you were small but did not make you feel like that was a problem. Wren pulled her collar up and kept walking. Behind her, Callum did the same.